Welcome to The Print. I'm The Print's National Security Editor, Praveen Swami. As many of you know, a short period of time ago, we had a very dangerous incident where an Indian cruise missile suffered a mishap. We're still not sure what, and ended up flying across the India-Pakistan border and hitting the town of Mia Channu. Thankfully, there were no fatalities in this incident, and both countries have acknowledged its seriousness, are investigating it. But many of our viewers have had questions about how something like this could happen and what it really means for both these nuclear weapons armed countries. We have two extremely eminent experts with us today to discuss this issue. Lieutenant General DS Hooda has served as India's Northern Army commander, has had a direct role in commanding the use and doctrines of strategic or nuclear weapons. On the other side, Syed Muhammad Ali is a well-known theorist and thinker about nuclear weapons. He works in a think tank in Islamabad and has been a participant in many track 2 dialogues, just behind the curtain dialogues between India and Pakistan, where many of these things have been discussed over the years. We're going to try and keep this discussion as boring as possible because we don't want an India-Pakistan fight here in our program also, but try and unpackage some of these very complex issues for a lay audience. If I may begin with you, General Hooda, the first question is this. How could a mishap like this actually happen? And what are the dangers, future mishaps? After all, these are machines, things can go wrong. What are the dangers future mishaps might have, both for India and for Pakistan?
So Praveen, thank you so much for inviting me for this dialogue. What exactly happened? Was there a technical or a human error? I mean, something that's being investigated by an inquiry. I think India has taken it seriously. You've heard the defense minister's statement in parliament saying that this is something that we take very seriously and that we'll investigate it. Accidents could happen. It shouldn't, but I'm saying accidents could happen. I think the crucial issue is that they should not develop into a crisis between India and Pakistan. And thankfully, in this case, this has not happened because a great deal of maturity has been shown by both sides. So I think that's one positive sort of takeaway from this. If you ask me, there are a few lessons I think for nuclear stability in the subcontinent. The first is there's been a failure of strategic communication between the two sides. There are existing hotlines between the Director General Military Operations. There are also existing hotlines between the foreign secretaries that were set up as part of nuclear confidence building measures. The fact that none of these were apparently activated is something that we need to look at in the future. The other issue, Praveen, I want to point out is that this whole issue about nuclear and strategic stability in South Asia should not be an issue that comes up only when some sort of crisis happens.
Right.
This is something that should be looked at, during peacetime. We do have fairly comprehensive confidence-building measures on nuclear issues that were signed in 1999 at Lahore. Unfortunately, what has happened is that after the Mumbai attacks in 2008, and then with the current sort of political climate that exists, we haven't had serious discussions on these issues. And my final point, Praveen, as part of our opening remarks, is that there is a difference in how the two countries look at nuclear weapons. India looks at nuclear weapons as a means of deterring the use of nuclear weapons, and that is why it has a declared no first use policy. That it will only be used in response to nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear, biological chemical attacks. So it looks at nuclear weapons as a way of deterring nuclear weapons. On the other hand, Pakistan doctrine, they haven't published a doctrine, but we are hearing about terms like a full spectrum response. So it appears that Pakistan looks at nuclear weapons as a way of deterring conventional warfighting. And we hear all these statements that have come out from Pakistan side that is because of nuclear weapons that India has not used its conventional military forces. So in some ways, it's a part of conventional warfighting, tactical nuclear weapons. And that I think in some ways is sort of inherently destabilizing. So there is also a need, I think, to look at the doctrines of nuclear doctrines of the two sides and try and come to an understanding. There was, if you look at the nuclear confidence building measures, one aspect of those nuclear confidence building measures is that we need to have bilateral consultations on concepts and nuclear doctrine. To me, that is very important because, as I said, there is a mismatch in how the two countries look at nuclear weapons. So I'll end here, Praveen, and then we can, discuss and debate some of these issues later.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, General Saab. And without much ado, we'll return to some of the themes you flagged here. But Ali Saab, perhaps you can give us a sense of exactly how the same incident, this missile flying across the border, is seen from Pakistan's optic, and what risks it, in your view, ought to make both these countries think about.
I think because we hope substantive and constructive and result-oriented engagement today. So I'm going to frame it in 4 arguments. Number one, I think the first aspect is what are the causes of instability? Okay, what are the causes of instability? I'll just identify them so that when we work on measures which could be considered for managing stability, these 4 need to be simultaneously appreciated and understood. First is identity politics. Second is geography. Third is history. And fourth is technology. Since most of our discussion largely focuses on technology, but my original and initial argument is that technology provides us the strategic means, but the ends and the threat perception and the strategic objectives are shaped by the perceptions, the threat perceptions based on identity, history, and geography. So the causes are these 3. That's the first argument. Secondly, what are the drivers of instability right now? Because I think we share a common concern and a common interest at finding and exploring ways to maintain stability despite increasing complexity of weapons, increasing arsenals, and more aggressive postures. I think I would frame it in the context of hybrid warfare. And this is what I think is a modest but original contribution to the debate that I want to make. Because so far, traditionally, the strategic stability has been seen in the typical and traditional explanation given by Herman Kahn's, escalatory ladder and so many rungs. And there'll be a threshold, and there'll be a conventional, nuclear, that sort of thing. What is actually happening, Praveen, is that the strategic competition between India and Pakistan is playing out globally across at least 6 domains simultaneously. We see some limited, very limited, firing incidents on the LOC, that is the conventional side. We see a sub-conventional side, and then obviously there's the nuclear factor. But simultaneously, we are very concerned in Pakistan at the increasing militarization of space, cyber domain, and also the political use of economic coercion and the influence vis-a-vis FATF, and also in terms of the psychological warfare, in terms of how Pakistani image is presented internationally in Indian media. So we understand that how Pakistan is perceived, how Pakistan conceptualizes stability is beyond kinetic and conventional and missile domains. So when we work on areas in reducing misperceptions and building trust and confidence, we have to work simultaneously in these domains, which are increasingly, unfortunately, diversifying. Now, the third part is specifically related to the risks which this missile incident posed. There are 5 aspects in which in the subsequent rounds we can have a more focused and detailed discussion and deliberation. The first is the threat perception, which affects your targeting, what sort of data you feed in your missiles. For example, it ended up in Miachunu. So my technical understanding informs me that it must have a map or data fed into it, whether it was authorized or not, whether it was accidental, but it followed the path which it was given in the software. Number one. Second is the doctrine, as Jan Sahab also pointed out. The doctrines are very important, and there needs to be greater understanding and trust of each other's doctrines and what we mean by that. Number 3 is the posture, whether the alert levels are consistent with what the doctrines claim. If it's no first use, then why the missiles are kept in such high level of alert? So there is a growing threat perception in Pakistan that perhaps the declaratory doctrine is not consistent with the technological development and more aggressive and alert postures. Fourth aspect is the safety aspect, which Jan Sahab mentioned, we don't know what happened. And I'd like to learn more about it, because if it was a technical error or a technological issue, a fail-safe issue, an accidental issue, then that's a safety issue, which is very grave. Because if it was armed and if it had hit some population, then obviously Pakistan's response would not have been this restrained, because it would be compelled under public pressure as well to respond, and the response would have been different. And the fifth part, which is more grave than the safety aspect, is the security aspect. There are some recent reports since yesterday that some group captain is being investigated by the inquiry. So does that mean that some individual was responsible for it, who decided that it can be launched, or it was an individual error of judgment or decision, whether intentional or unintentional? So it's a human factor makes it more dangerous.
General Hoda, I wanted to draw you out a little bit here, and ask, many of our readers have asked, why should this bother us? After all, these two sides have many times in the past shelled each other. There's been a very active line of control. In this particular incident, there was no warhead on this missile. Nothing actually blew up. Nobody got killed. Surely this shows the system actually works in some way or the other. Even if there was a misfire, nothing went terribly wrong. What would be your response to this, firstly? And secondly, what do you have to say about Ali Saab's concerns about the robustness of Indian systems? Are there some lessons that India could be usefully learning from this?
Okay, so Praveen, I just want to, on this issue of command control and whether protocols are in place or not, I just want to make a distinction, and I think that's important to make the distinction between nuclear weapons and conventional weapons. Yeah. So as far as the BrahMos missile is concerned, it's a conventional weapon. So therefore, to try and say the protocols that are there, command control arrangements, etc., that are there for nuclear weapons are obviously different from that of the BrahMos. So the BrahMos in this instant case was actually under control of the Air Force. Nuclear weapons are all under Strategic Forces Command. And as I said, the protocol, the command control arrangement, their handling is completely different. So I don't think we should confuse the two issues. That because an accident has happened as far as this BrahMos is concerned, this means, and it translates into that the nuclear weapon protocols and handling is also in the same manner. So I think that clarity needs to be made. Why it is dangerous surely is because when a ballistic missile or a cruise missile, even if it's a conventional warhead missile, is launched, there is no clarity on the other side whether, what kind of warhead this carries.
So just to clarify, sir, for a lay audience, if I was in India and I saw a missile incoming from Pakistan, I could not tell whether it was carrying a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead.
Yeah, exactly. So similarly, if you actually look at, for example, the Chinese nuclear arsenal, the same missiles, exactly the same missiles, both have conventional warheads, and the same missile could also have a nuclear warhead. That is where the danger is. But I'm saying to equate protocols and handling of conventional missiles with nuclear missiles, because the handling, the control, the command control is completely different. So that is something that I think we need to keep in mind. The other issue about, there are tensions between the two sides. We can go into, as you said, many reasons. But precisely because there are tensions on both sides, that we need to be careful about, nuclear stability and strategic stability in South Asia.
Undoubtedly, the two countries, we're having a relatively peaceful time on the line of actual control, but crises have been a part of our relationship for many decades now, an unfortunate part of this relationship. Similarly, the two Cold War adversaries constantly were at a state Y of crisis of proxy war. There were many instances when missteps, misperceptions led the two into, potentially catastrophic misjudgments about the other's intentions. Yet they managed to make progress on things like the number of nuclear warheads they allowed each other to have, on the kinds of technologies, intermediate range ballistic missiles, they arrived at agreements on measures to notify each other. Very interesting set of documents released yesterday on their mutual notification systems at times of mishaps and chaos. People like you have been advocating for these mechanisms at TRACTOS for a number of years now. If the Cold War superpowers could do it, why have we failed? Why have we not been able to make progress in this direction?
There is a lot that both Pakistan and India have learned from the Cold War experience, despite peculiarities in the environment. And there again, that reiterates the earlier framework in which I started my initial thought. It is geography, history, and identity. That makes it more alarming, because there is identity politics in the region. The geography, we are two contiguous nuclear powers. The flight times are so short. So there is greater risk, shorter flight time, and more need for timely, like Dr. Jan Saab rightly pointed out, for timely and unambiguous strategic communication to ensure there is no retaliation, or ensuring that it was not intentional. So that is very important. But I think there are two aspects which on which we can further build in subsequent rounds. First is that since brass tacks in '86, we've had almost 6 crises: 1990, Kargil, standoff 2001-2, Mumbai, and Balakot, in which both countries, despite limited escalation, and as Jan Saab has rightly written in his recent prolific article, really great article, I read it recently, have demonstrated a degree of responsibility and restraint, that not to escalate. So the behavior is mature and responsible, but it needs to ensure that despite growing arsenals, number one, quantitatively, and number two, diversifying delivery systems. So there's more technology, more complexities at stake, that the need for safety, security, and strategic confidence building is very important. In fact, more important than it was earlier.
General Hooda, the same question about the Cold War, really. We've recently seen a number of declassified documents unpacking occasions where the two Cold War powers received false alerts from their signals, from their computers and satellites about missile launches on the other side. some which, sparked alarm at the highest levels of government and near retaliation. We've heard about cases where nuclear weapons were improperly stored or secured. So my first happiness is that, South Asians are not the only incompetent people on the planet. The great superpowers were just as capable of errors or missteps. But in tangible terms, when you have two countries here who, unlike the Cold War, don't have half an hour to react to each other's nuclear weapons, can there really be a technological fix to this problem when political leaders may have seconds or minutes to make a call on whether to retaliate or not? And how might that, in your view, how might that problem of time be addressed?
So as you said, Praveen, I think it needs to be looked at in technological terms, and what are the kind of systems that we have in place. Talking about if there is an accidental launch, for example, a self-destruct kind of mechanism. I think what we also need to do is, in practical terms, go a little beyond. As I said, there are already confidence-building measures that are in place. Do we need to look for new things? The example of a Cold War and, for example, the arms limitation talks that took place between the two sides. I'm not sure how practical that is, because we are not talking only about two nuclear countries here, we're talking about three nuclear countries. So when India looks at its strategic stability, it's not only looking at Pakistan, it's also looking at China's nuclear arsenal. And therefore, I'm not sure, this arms limitation, etc., can actually progress much more. So what we possibly can do is build on the existing confidence building measures. And as Ali Saab also pointed out, should we now include cruise missiles in notification, which was not there earlier? It was only ballistic missile advanced notification of firing. Do we need to build in greater technology threats? For example, do we need to now, there is a CBM in place that we will not attack each other's nuclear facilities, physical attacks. Do we need to extend that to also say cyber attacks, for example? Cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, cyber attacks on nuclear command and control. I mean, that could be highly sort of destabilizing if your nuclear command control facility is being attacked through cyber means. So some of that extension, I think, we need to do. Also, looking at the Cold War, there was very extensive and exhaustive debates on things like nuclear deterrence. I'm afraid in the India-Pakistan context, that kind of debate actually has not taken place. And that debate needs to take place, an educated, exhaustive, extensive debate on nuclear issues, on nuclear deterrence. And whether it takes place in the two countries, is there scope for track 2? We could look at that in the future. My sense is, let's build on the existing confidence building measures, add what are the sort of new dangers that have come to fore, and include those as part of our CBM.
We're going to show you some graphics of cities on both sides of the border to explain why a nuclear bomb is a little different from just a particularly big conventional bomb, and give you a sense of the devastation it would bring to cities that you might live in, our audience. And now moving on, Ali Saab, I wanted to ask you, General Hooda said that the existing structures of the conversation provide a robust foundation for new measures. I've heard a lot of concern from friends in Pakistan, experts in Pakistan, over the impact of coming technologies, which could include ballistic missile defense, which India is investing in. On the Indian side, concerns about short and intermediate range Pakistani systems. Of course, both sides are investing in research on new kinds of technologies like hypersonic weapons. We don't know what kinds of impacts there might be. What might an India-Pakistan conversation on these issues look like?
The first was the threat perception. The second is doctrines. And I think General Saab also mentioned that. It is because in terms of acronyms, what we mean by what we are saying, also sometimes the jargons are different. So it is very important for both sides to understand what we mean by what we are saying when we are saying NFU and
And if you
I
just
appreciate.
clarify, sir, is no first
Yeah.
use, a promise
Yes.
not to be the first to use a nuclear weapon.
Exactly. And because, like I earlier pointed out, then it again, the third aspect is the posture. Is your doctrinal, commitment consistent with your posture? And herein lies the concern, which is increasing in Pakistan, because that's where I bring in the identity politics. As an independent nuclear expert, I look at BJP's manifestos as influencing nuclear doctrine as part of its domestic politics as well. I don't know why, because it promised in the manifesto in '98 that it will resume testing. We didn't take it seriously in Pakistan, but they did resume testing in '98. Then later on, there was another promise at the political level that they will review the doctrine. And then some of my old friends and very close and respected Indian strategic thinkers also, like late P.R. Chari, he also wrote about it, a very famous paper in Carnegie, Stirrings of Change. And then a series of articles were written by Vipin Narang and Chris Clary on this, that actually whether the Indian doctrine has undergone a major change. And in that context, Pakistan interprets a higher alert level, indicating a review of the no fuss use, and secondly, an improvement and expansion of its PMD capability. So these two things indicate that, and number three, the size of the arsenal. So I think Pakistanis, when they add up these three things, a higher alert level, large arsenal, and number three, improvement and acquisition of BMD system, we do not find it consistent with the original, doctrinal enunciation by India. So that is an aspect that we can perhaps discuss more in detail to have a greater clarity. And then come the two more specific issues which are of immediate nature: safety and security. What can we do to ensure, not just to assure and address concerns on the other side of the border, but just to ensure that we have our individual interest in being seen as a responsible nuclear power. Accidents and unauthorized launches do not take place. So what are we doing? What are the commitments? What are the technological? Do we have 2-man rule, 3-man rule? What sort of launch sequence is there? How are these things done? We are not going into classified domain, but this is part of the academic debate on nuclear command control and nuclear strategy, that responsible nuclear powers are not expected to keep a launch on warning sort of alert status while you're claiming a no fuss use. And also, can a group captain, which nuclear theorists call mad colonel's dilemma, is it in place? How it is prevented technically and politically? So basically, there are three approaches which need to be simultaneously considered by both sides. One is the political aspect, the second is the operational or procedural aspect, and the third is the technical aspect. I think simultaneously ways, means, commitments, procedures, and technological measures need to be explored and considered and agreed to make sure there are no unauthorized or accidental uses. And we both, are prevented from an unintentional nuclear holocaust.
General Hooda, I mean, I was very interested listening to Ali Saab explain Pakistan's nuclear concerns, because I've heard exactly the same thing said in New Delhi by people who are concerned about Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. Those being usually an argument that runs, Pakistan is expanding its arsenal, particularly of short-range nuclear weapons. Therefore, India needs ballistic missile defense. That there are a number of concerns that Pakistan, in response to superior Indian conventional force may first use a nuclear weapon, which would of course then endanger India's nuclear weapons and give it an interest in striking first. How is it that both sides have exactly the same worries, more or less, about the other's nuclear intentions? And given these suspicions, is it really possible to assuage these suspicions through a dialogue and a treaty mechanism?
So Praveen, you're right. So we heard Ali Saab talking about Pakistan concern, and you flagged some of the Indian concern. And the primary concern is that there is a complete lack of clarity as far as Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is concerned. At least India has a published nuclear doctrine. It has mentioned that we have a policy of no first use. That is not there as far as the Pakistani nuclear doctrine is concerned. All we hear about, as I mentioned earlier, was a full spectrum response, which means conventional nuclear is somehow sort of tied in together. On the issue of domestic politics, I think we hear more things from the other side as far as the use of nuclear weapons is concerned. The minute a small crisis happens, you will hear political leadership on the other side talking about, see, we are a nuclear armed country, and these are our nuclear weapons that we have. These kind of threats are being made actually more from the Pakistani side. I don't see the Indian side making. On the issue of safety and security, there are huge concerns on the Indian side of whether the Pakistani nuclear arsenal is safe, and it's a concern that has not only been expressed in India, but I think globally it's been expressed. What happens if it falls into the wrong hands? Those concerns are also sort of expressed. So the fact that Pakistan is developing tactical nuclear weapons, for example, and although not clearly stated, are for use on the conventional battlefield. So I think these are concerns that are also very, very real on the Indian side, and which is why I think a comprehensive and extensive dialogue needs to be carried out. If we can talk about what the nuclear practices, processes, without going into any classified things about doctrines, etc., on both sides. Look at how accidents can be prevented. I think there is a clear understanding, despite whatever sort of talk there is about nuclear weapons, there is a clear understanding that is going to be disastrous for the subcontinent. So I think it's better that we debate and discuss and talk about these kind of things, talk about how to prevent accidents, talk about how we can strengthen nuclear safety issues, talk about how can we have a more open sort of and clear doctrine, a more transparent doctrine on both sides. So if, as Ali Saab said, if there are concerns that is India going to abandon no first use, it hasn't. There has been some talk, but it hasn't. I mean, clearly the doctrine stays in place. But if there is greater transparency in talking about doctrines, I think that is, that is possibly sort of the way forward to go. And as I said, if it can't happen, it should happen in government-to-government dialogues, possibly also supported by some track to mechanisms.
Ali Saab, I sort of having two civilized experts having a serious conversation here is one thing, but you've been a participant, both of you, in many track two efforts to begin exactly the kinds of measures both of you are talking about. And at the end of the day, 20 years into this conversation, there isn't that much there to show. Why is that? Is it a reluctance at the level of political leaders to engage in the kinds of conversations that are needed on nuclear weapons and strategic stability? Is there a problem in the militaries? Where does the problem lie?
I think it's an important question, Praveen. Let me respond to what Jan Saab has said. I think there are 2 points in which I'll respectfully disagree with him. I think, India or nuclear issues have never been part of election campaigns and popular politics in Pakistan. Obviously, that is very important. But in Pakistan, as I pointed out, and specifically mentioned the election manifesto of BJP on 2 occasions. One was specifically related to the resumption of nuclear tests, which they actually did. And then also this, review of the doctrine. And I have no way of ensuring that they have not done it. Because when I'm saying this declaratory posture and comparing it with the actual things which are happening on ground in terms of technological developments, their trends, I think, have sort of, let me put it this way, outlived, these technological developments have outlived the commitments which were diplomatically made, I don't know, 15 years ago. So perhaps a fresh document which is consistent with the new capabilities and new responsibilities that India is willing to take as a responsible nuclear power is desired. In case of Pakistan, I partly agree with Jalsam that we have not in an identical manner given a document in public, but we have a different approach towards doctrine. We have made specific legal and diplomatic commitments, and herein I will refer to 3 sets of documents. One, which is available on internet, is the NCA Act. It specifies exactly Pakistan's national command authority.
My apologies.
Yes. It was passed by the parliament through a majority vote under a democratic government, and it is available publicly, and it says exactly what is the purpose of our nuclear program, who is the decision maker, who are the members, what are the responsibilities of that. In fact, it goes down in more detail and explains what are the responsibilities of those that institution as well as those individuals. That is a very comprehensive document. More than 26, 27 articles are there. One. Secondly, whenever Pakistan's National Command Authority meets, there is most of the time there is a specific statement given after that based on the key findings. It has some signals, and there almost more than 2 dozen NCA statements available since a National Command Authority was created. And the third are the Pakistan's diplomatic commitments and stances which we have made at the Conference on Disarmament. So Pakistan has a different approach based on the diplomatic, constitutional, and also legal and political engagements and commitments that we make. So I think they need to be taken just as seriously by the international community. And the third point is that I think it is, in fact, it was Balakot where we saw that perhaps Balakot strike had something to do with it had something to do with the upcoming elections. And there is a sense in Pakistan that if the BJP government desires more anti-Muslim votes, then perhaps a dangerous adventure against Pakistan helps get more votes. That is definitely not the case in case of Pakistan. In fact, in Pakistan, I think India bashing or nuclear program is never an issue. In fact, whenever there is a political issue right now, the main issues are economic in concern. Pakistan's polity, let me assure you, notwithstanding some hardliners and hawks are on both sides, you will agree. But the popular mainstream heart and soul of Pakistan's polity is not motivated or inspired or convinced by a potential legislator by India bashing. Nobody gets India and India board.
If I may just interrupt for half a minute, I'm curious about this because you're always going to have a political government in one country or the other that is substantially more hawkish than the government that may be present on the other side. And there's a long history to this. Do you believe it is still possible to make progress on nuclear security and stability irrespective of the political problem? Because the political climate clearly will unfold as it unfolds. That is something the strategic community has very little control over?
I think it's a very important question. My short answer would be definitely, because I think, as I earlier pointed out, in terms of the framework I gave in terms of hybrid warfare, there is competition which is increasingly diversifying and expanding in so many domains, including cyber, economic, diplomatic, psychological. But it is, I think, a common interest of both sides that nuclear war is not in the interest of both countries. In fact, I recall after one of the dialogues between India and Pakistan, we both agreed, I think perhaps 2005 it was, that nuclear deterrence is a factor of stability in the region. So I hope that is still the understanding, notwithstanding the domestic politics. And that is an area in which we can build on by ensuring three things. That could be the potential objectives to explore, some sort of track on that in that context. That arsenals are expanding, postures are changing, so there are no misperceptions and there are no accidents. That is the starting point. And then incrementally we can build into, once that confidence is developed, that increasing arsenal and changing postures do not lead to unauthorized or accidental use of any strategic weapon system. Then gradually we can build confidence and develop into other areas as well. So I think that we will need baby steps. It's not all or nothing that we need a dialogue or we don't need a dialogue. We definitely need, and I think let me give an example from the Ukraine crisis, from the Ukraine conflict. I think Jan Saab would also appreciate that although Ukraine had no extended deterrence from the US, but there was a clear, unambiguous signaling from the highest level in Washington that US will not put its troops on the ground in Ukraine. So that is very important, because their overarching consideration was to prevent a direct conflict between Russia and the US. So I think we should also seek inspiration from this, that there is a degree of maturity and responsibility. We both want nuclear weapons as weapons of peace to prevent war rather than win wars. Because there is a concern in Pakistan, to put it in a nutshell, that the Indian desire, inspired by greater access to international technology and diplomatic assistance, is encouraging a more aggressive strategic posture towards Pakistan. That is a concern in Pakistan. So perhaps, the starting point, like I said, could be working on areas to ensure ensuring measures which include preventing accidental or unauthorized use measures, and then gradually moving into other areas incrementally.
So we're almost out of time, and I will give General Hooda the last few minutes. My question for you, sir, is you've heard three suggestions from Ali Saab as a foundational basis for a future India-Pakistan dialogue on this. Would you agree with those steps, at least in general terms? My second question is, it seems to me that all of these measures rest in the final analysis on the level of trust the two strategic establishments are willing to have on the other's adversaries, because clearly a piece of paper is not worth very much without that foundational trust. How do you think that might be deepened and developed? Sir, I'm afraid I can't hear your... Sorry.
Sorry. Oh, I agree with what, Ali Saab is recommending. So I think, as he said, baby steps, let's start, let's look at, certain areas and move forward on that. On the issue of, developing trust, I mean, there are two ways to look at it. I mean, do you require nuclear confidence building measures between France and England and UK? No, you don't. So the reason why you require confidence building measures is because there is a certain amount of mistrust, there's a lack of trust, there's tension between the two sides. And so I come back to that point. If we continue to harp on what is happening between the two countries, do that, political finger pointing at each other, that India is carrying out attacks because of some political reasons, and we say we have to respond to major terrorist attacks in India. So that dialogue and that debate in the two countries can continue to go on. My point is, despite that, should we seriously look at nuclear confidence building measures just because of the scale of damage that these weapons can cause? Because we are two neighboring countries where warning times are so short. Both countries are armed with nuclear weapons. Both countries are increasing their nuclear arsenal. If you look at international reports, in fact, Pakistan has more nuclear weapons than India has. And therefore, there is a need. On the issue of doctrine and I think open debate, so see, there is a feeling in India that here, anytime anything happens, Pak is going to pull out the nuclear card. And this nuclear blackmail is no longer acceptable to us, and it's something that we have got over it. And I think this is also a dangerous situation when both sides think that both the sides are sort of bluffing and not serious about nuclear issues. So there is a need to have a dialogue. Trust will come. I see there are two ways. One is the top down, that trust is there, and then the confidence building measures are put in place. The other is that you have confidence building measures in different areas, and that could somehow also drive trust and confidence at the higher level. So I leave it at that.
It's been a wonderful conversation, and I can't thank you both for having made the time for it, but also for the quality of the discussion. I wish we had more serious India-Pakistan conversations of this kind at public venues like this one, other than just in the sort of track 2 or track 1.5 sphere. And I hope I'll be able to welcome both of you back again in the future, hopefully under somewhat happier circumstances and without any missiles misfiring the next time.